Hello, everybody. Good morning. This is actually Sunday morning. I'm giving you guys this last video to close the Civil War and Reconstruction, and I'm ready to go. I got my metaphysical latte here, right? Ready to go, except it's actual physical latte. Hazelnut, if you actually want to know. And I'm going to be teaching you guys about Reconstruction. So settle in. This is probably the most important subject of all of the ones that I've given you on these videos. And by now you should have done the zeitgeist for it. But I'm going to try and help you put it all together, as well as put together some legacies of Reconstruction looking forward, right? Some of these things are, well, a lot of these things we're going to be talking about in class after I return, going forward, like what the South looks like after the Civil War for the next several decades, for the next 100 years, really. Okay, so not wasting any more time, let's get to the screen share. There we go. All right, so if you guys did what I asked, your zeitgeist dealt with these kinds of questions, like, you know, should the Confederate States be accepted back into the Union easily or not? Or should they somehow be punished, excuse me, for starting this war? Okay, I mean, yeah, one of the things I'm going to talk about with you guys in the weeks after we get back from Thanksgiving is that the Democratic Party is going to get a stigma, right? Because it was Southern Democrats that started this war. That was the party of secession, okay? And you guys know that the Republicans in Congress are going to want to make sure everybody remembers that. And you know that there are going to be people there that want to punish the Confederate States, okay? And then what needs must be met for recently emancipated slaves? That was the other issue, right? You've got millions now. I want to say it's around 4 million at the time, newly emancipated Black people. Freedmen is what they were called. And you see it here. Okay. And they're effectively refugees, right? We've just now added all these freedmen into the mix. And by constitutional mandate, because of amendments that are going to get passed by the Republicans that control Congress, they're going to be allowed to vote now, right? But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's all kinds of things that these folks need. And I guess the way we really should look at Reconstruction is how well did the United States government address these two issues, right? Do you feel like they were addressed well, or were they addressed poorly by the United States government? Let's take a look at the political and economic realities, all right? Radical Republicans versus Democrats. Okay, so we're not just concerned about Republicans like Lincoln. There are radical Republicans, guys like Seward, guys like Sumner, okay, that were in Congress and wanted to punish the South. There were a lot of Northern radical Republicans who were like, no. You guys started this war. If you want back into this country now, it's going to cost you, and it's going to be a rocky road, right? And that's what, and the radical Republicans are the ones that start to dominate in Congress, and they're going to absolutely stand in opposition to Andrew Johnson, okay? Because Andrew Johnson is not a Republican, okay? And he's a Southerner. All the things that I told you guys about before, nobody trusts him. He has no friends. Andrew Johnson has no friends. The Southern Democrats are like, you betrayed us. The Northerners are like, you're a Southerner. Why would we trust you? And Andrew Johnson wants to keep Lincoln's line of thinking. Remember, if Lincoln would have survived the war, he would have made it relatively easy for Southerners to come back into the nation and have a country again. But Abraham Lincoln did not survive the war. Andrew Johnson wants to do that. He wants to make it easy, but he does not carry nearly the clout of Lincoln. Like Abraham Lincoln would have had a hard enough time dealing with these radical Republicans, many of whom were like abolitionists and stuff, right? Abraham Lincoln would have had a hard time with them. Andrew Johnson's gonna have an impossible time with them. And Andrew Johnson doesn't have nearly the reputation that Lincoln had, okay? It's going to get so bad between these two groups, actually, that I think a very reasonable way to interpret what unfolds with Reconstruction is that newly freed Black Americans are caught in the middle of this tug of war between these white groups. Okay, you've got these, you know, Democrats, even ones that aren't Southern Democrats, but there are Democrats who are like, let's make it easy, let the South back in, blah blah blah, and these radical Republicans who want to punish the South. But the thing about a lot of these radical Republicans is they're not necessarily altruistic. What I mean by that is they don't necessarily have this love for Black Americans and this desire to see equality reach. Some of them do. Like some of them are like, yeah, I mean, this is what this was all about. This war was about. But others are really, what they want to do is use the Black population of this country now to punish the South. They want to like punish the South through them. Okay. And that's not fair to anybody, right? Again, either whether you're a, Southern racist or a Northern radical Republican reformer, right? Either way, Black Americans are being used as like pawns in this battle, okay, between these groups in Reconstruction. I think you see that with the impeachment of Andrew Johnson, okay? Andrew Johnson is going to be the first United States president to be impeached by the House. He will not be removed. As you all know, we have still not removed a sitting president of the United States through impeachment, even one that was impeached twice. Kind of begs the question at this point, what is the real value of impeachment? But whatever. Andrew Johnson, often ruled one of the worst presidents in United States history, is going to stand in opposition to everything the radical Republicans want to do to make the lives of Black people better in this country. Okay. He sees any efforts by Republicans to improve the lives of Black people as politically motivated and just to stick it to Southerners. And meanwhile, wants to follow Lincoln's plan, which, to be honest with you, Andrew Johnson is also misguided on Lincoln's plan as well. So he's gonna really kind of dig his heels in, and then the radical Republicans in Congress are also going to dig their heels in, and the result is going to be ridiculous. Nothing, something gets passed, and then like Johnson refuses to enforce it, or he vetoes it and forces the radical Republicans to pass it over his veto. They see him as standing in the way of progress. Okay, and they're right. I mean, overall, they're right. He is standing in the way of progress. But Andrew Johnson ultimately will be impeached on a trumped up, if you pardon the expression, like law that was built. Like the radical Republicans on purpose are going to here, let me put this down. The radical Republicans on purpose are going to pass something called the Tenure of Office Act. And they do this because they know that there are members of Andrew Johnson's cabinet that he kind of inherited from Lincoln, and also people that stand in opposition to his softness on Southerners. And so these Republicans passed this law that says Andrew Johnson is not allowed to dismiss any cabinet members or people in the government that he wants to without permission from Congress. And when Andrew Johnson does it anyway, these Republicans are like, aha, we got him. He broke a law that we passed. That is grounds for impeachment. It's a total trap, kind of BS politicized situation. As much as I don't like Andrew Johnson personally as a historian, looking at his records, like terrible. But this was just a trap move, okay? And, Andrew Johnson will survive the impeachment by one vote. But it certainly doesn't help the relationship between him and Congress, which is going to remain bitter until Andrew Johnson will later be replaced by Ulysses Grant as president of the United States. Okay. All right, let's go back to the module. Okay. So we also want to remember the economic ruin in the South. Okay. So the South you know, suffered the brunt of the property damage and whatnot. You know, their fields were burned, their cities were destroyed. You know, you saw some of the photographs in that Ken Burns Civil War thing that I had you guys watch. You know, the war effectively took place on the South soil, right? Virginia, notably. So they're in trouble. And there are two things I want to talk about here. The radical Republicans want to help Black people through something called the Freedmen's Bureau, okay? And the Freedmen's Bureau is meant to provide economic opportunity, as well as, you know, the old phrase is land for Black Americans to be able to work on and make a living, right? The old phrase was 40 acres and a mule, which is a bit of an overstatement. The problem is there are people in the Freedmen's Bureau that are corrupt, that are doing this on behalf of the government. The land like distribution to freed Black people never really materializes, right? The idea is you take land from those old plantations and you allow Black people to like farm it and, you know, develop it and have small plots that they can live on. Remember, you've got an entire population now, roughly 4 million people that have farming skills, but only basic farming skills, because they've been prevented from education. They've been prevented from advancement all of their lives. They're now effectively homeless because what are they going to do, right? And the Freedmen's Bureau is trying to address these issues. One of them is on land distribution, the other is education. They are limited in its success on both. All right. The land distribution thing never really materializes. Instead, some of the best land is gobbled up by unscrupulous investors in the North. Okay. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Instead of given to newly freed Black Americans, it goes to unscrupulous white people in the North. All right. And taken from people in the South. Okay. In addition, the education issue does see some improvement. Like there are people that go into the South from the North and organize like societies and efforts to provide education for freedmen, okay, newly freed Black people. Their limited success. I think the number I see most often is around 100,000 or so Black Americans are educated through the Freedmen's Bureau. But when you consider that the entire population of Southern enslaved people was 4 million, right? That's not much of a dent, okay? Even if it's a couple 100,000, that's not much of a dent, right? And as we know, oftentimes education is the path to success, right? The other path to success is land ownership, which gets denied straight up, okay? So what you, in essence, are gonna have is, yeah, millions of now free people, but they're totally dependent on either the federal government to do something or the white Southern racists who recently enslaved them. So this is a bad scenario all the way around. However you look at it. I mean, is slavery dead? Yes. But you're going to see that one of the main objects of the South is to return the South to a state of near conditions to what it was before the Civil War. So white Southerners are not going to be allowed to have slavery anymore, but they're going to rig a system that's going to be as close as they can get to that system that they had before the Civil War. Okay. Carpetbaggers are exactly what I was talking about when I said there are unscrupulous white people who are going to basically take, they're called this because they'll take a carpet bag full of cash, okay, or whatever, and go into the South and buy up land, buy up defunct plantations, buy up all kinds of stuff from desperate, excuse me, from desperate Southerners who, you know, need to sell now or they're going to starve, okay, after this war is over. And remember that, you know, with the freeing of the slaves, you know, a lot of these plantation owners and stuff are going to be desperate and defunct because their entire economic system was based on enslaving other people. And these carpetbaggers are coming, hey, I'll tell you what, I will buy that plantation off of you for pennies on the dollar, right? And, you know, looking to develop the land somehow. And, you know, many now destitute white Southerners are going to sell or definitely feel like they're being taken advantage of by these Northern investors. And those Northern investors are called carpetbaggers. It's a negative term. And it shows you that like anything, people are willing to take advantage of misery and tragedy in a bad situation. These Northern carpetbaggers are no different, okay? Anybody in the South that attempts to cooperate with Northerners on Reconstruction will be branded scalawags, which is kind of like a term for traitor. Okay, I just got done telling you a lot of white Southerners are going to want to return the South now that the Civil War is over to a state of near slavery, right? Like they want the scenario as close to possible as it was before the war started. And anybody that interferes with that by working with the Freedmen's Bureau or by enforcing Northern laws that Congress passes on the South, right, is going to be viewed as a traitor to Southern society and be referred to as scalawags, okay? The effect of the Civil War economically that you have got to circle in blood, seriously, stab yourself, use the blood, circle, sharecropping. This is the probably biggest and most enduring problem that Reconstruction creates that never really gets solved, okay? Sharecropping, of course, is feudalism. It's feudalism. What a lot of Black Americans do now that they're free, but they can't read and write, and they can't, like, they have limited skills because they've been enslaved for most, if not all of their lives. Now they find themselves in a scenario like, what do we do? And many of them, just to be able to eat, end up returning to the very plantations they were enslaved on. And the owners of those plantations, particularly the Southern owners of those plantations, are willing to accept them back as sharecroppers. Can't be slaves anymore, but instead you can you know, farm a small plot of land for them. If you're Black, you can farm a small plot of land for the very guy who used to enslave you. You're not a slave anymore. You're going to live on you're renting the land from your former owner, okay? And you work the land and you're allowed to live on the land. You can even build a little house on it or whatever, but the vast majority of what you produce goes to the guy who owns the land. That's feudalism. And while sharecropping is not slavery, it is serfdom, okay? It is nearly slavery. And that is the way Black Americans are going to end up living for the next about 100 years. Like, sharecropping is still going to be around about 100 years later. That's how devastating it is as an economic system. Sharecropping begins in 1865 because slavery is abolished. And when the civil rights movement begins in the 1950s and 60s, there will still be sharecroppers, okay? And sharecropping is a system. I mean, look at this photograph. If I were to show you this, you know, when I'm usually in class with you, I show you this photograph and I show you a photograph from slavery and I go, which one is slavery? Which one is sharecropping? And people are like, right? This photograph was taken in 1898. This is 30 plus years after the Civil War. Here's what Black Americans are doing, okay? Because the entire goal of the South is to keep these folks who once were enslaved as a labor source, but now they have to pay them. So you're going to pay them by forcing them to turn over most of the crops they bring into you in exchange for being able to live on your land. Okay. And again, like I told you, a lot of Black Americans take this deal because they don't know anything else. Their options are limited. And the US government is only so at trying to provide options. Okay. This contract is a great example of the types of contracts that sharecroppers had to live under. Okay, the whites would draw up these contracts, and Black people would sign them or mark their X because a lot of them couldn't sign their name. And this one is a famous one excerpted from it's a UNC Chapel Hill in 1882. This was when the contract was drawn up, but the university kind of has the original, you know. I've seen this on the AP exam. I've seen it excerpted, okay? And let me just pause for a minute and let you read what the sharecropper, the Black person who's working the soil, what types of stuff is he or she responsible for here. I'll just give you a second to read this. Okay, so I just read it with you there, and I want you to take a look at this section in particular. So if you really think about it, in essence, what this is saying is when that cotton or tobacco or whatever is brought in, okay, I, the white Southern landowner, I get to decide when and where it gets sold, how much of it can be used to pay off you, the Black worker of the land, like how much of it gets used to pay off your debts, right? I basically, as a Southern white, this contract says I control the process, right? And being that, you know, most, if not all, sharecroppers could not really read or write or do math calculations because they had been in a state of slavery for such a long time. They have no idea that they're getting duped, like that the white, you know, owner is like over collecting his share of crops, right? Like he could tell them anything he wants. Now, that's not to say that a lot of Black sharecroppers were like, whoa, this isn't right. You're taking more than you're supposed to take. But they literally have no legal recourse. Like, even if you do recognize the situation, there's nothing you can do about it if you're a sharecropper. Unless you want to get thrown off the land, now you and your family's destitute, you got no way to live. This whole system of sharecropping is designed to keep Black Americans poor and destitute, because all of the equipment has to be bought in the owner of the land store. All of the work has to be done by the sharecropper. 80% roughly of the crops go to the owner of the land, not you, the sharecropper, in terms of the profit that's made. You're barely going to get enough profit as the sharecropper to pay your rent, the tools that you need to work the land. You're going to be in a constant state of debt, and so you'll never get out of it. And that is the point of sharecropping. The point of sharecropping is to replace slavery as a labor source, okay? Keep Black Americans poor and destitute and dependent on the Southern whites. That's the entire goal of it, okay? And you see, like, this image speaks for itself, okay? And so you got now a whole generation, millions of Black Americans who are going to be deprived the ability to work their way up and assimilate into US society. This is probably the biggest difference. I don't want to say the biggest, one of the biggest differences between being an immigrant to this country at this time and being a Black person who is now free, but has no options. Like, immigrants maybe might at times be able to work their way up the system, but not for sharecroppers. They're stuck, okay? And truth be told, there were white sharecroppers too. The landless whites who also worked. Like, the best thing that could have happened in the South is that poor whites and poor Black Americans get together and decide to they've had enough. They're not going to work this system anymore. They're going to form unions. They're going to strike. They're going to overthrow this system, right? But that never happens, because every time white and black farmers try to unionize, the racial thing always gets in the way. And wealthy whites who own the land are always going to point out to the laboring whites, look, the only thing you have over them is your white. So you need, like, join them at your own risk. And that is always enough to prevent these two groups of unionizing or getting together and to gain some economic power and status, right? Black codes. So these were also designed by Southern legislatures, all these, once these states accept the deal to be combined to the United States, right, to re-enter the US. These Southern legislatures, they passed what are known as black codes. And these were codes against things like loitering or debt, that would be mostly accumulated by newly freed black people. And the idea was to make it really easy for Black Americans to be in violation of local law, okay? And if you are arrested in the South for violating a black code, you could be imprisoned. And then now that you're imprisoned, you can be used as slave labor, because you broke the law and you're in prison. And the 13th Amendment, which gets passed during Reconstruction here, says that involuntary servitude, i.e. slavery, is still legal if you are arrested for a crime, right? Chain gangs, the South made prestigious use of them. Like, take all these people that we've arrested for no reason because of these bogus laws that were created in order to try and trap them, and then put them in a situation like this where they gotta, you give them shovels and work implements and make them labor in the fields. And usually they're like used as contract labor. So like Southern governments will like rent these prisoners out to be used by different landowners. And that's basically slavery. So if you can't have slavery anymore, make some bogus laws that you can trap black people with, things like being out past curfew or loitering in a street or whatever bogus law gets created. And then that's it. And you can see there's a photograph of it. Looks an awful like slavery to me, just with wearing stripy suits, right? Again, my little insert there says it all. Create a stable labor force for white Southerners and to politically control the black population. A lot of these black codes are going to eventually morph into what we're going to call Jim Crow laws that are meant to segregate whites and black people in the South. Okay. Jim Crow laws are the laws you guys are all familiar from like grade school, right? Like, black people have to use this restroom, white people use this one, right? Black people, this drinking fountain, white people, this drinking fountain. It's segregation, right? All that's going to develop out of these black codes, okay? All right, voting rights. So one of all right, so I feel like I need to jump to the amendments real quick, okay? I think I've got them here in the, yeah, all right. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Let me kind of jump to these first, all right? So hopefully, you recognize that one of the things that newly freed black people need is protection under the law, right? And the 13th Amendment, the Republicans in Congress particularly are going to be behind the passage of this 13th Amendment, which is going to make slavery illegal in the United States, except for if you break the law, like I just got done talking to you about, okay? So the 13th Amendment outlaws slavery. The 14th Amendment makes every person born on US soil a US citizen. And the intention of the 14th Amendment, therefore, was to provide citizenship rights to black people. Like, you were in a state of slavery, now you're not, but you were born on our soil, therefore you are a citizen of the United States, okay? This was the one that got the most blowback from Southerners But the US government under the radical Republicans particularly said either you ratify this 14th Amendment or you cannot come back into the United States. We'll keep occupying you with troops. Okay. And so Southerners had to begrudgingly accept the 14th Amendment and the citizenship status of Black Americans. Okay. The 15th Amendment was then also passed that protects voting rights. Okay. Voting cannot be deprived of somebody on account of race. Okay. So just like in a lot of ways, by the way, what Southerners do after the Civil War is systematically dismantle these amendments in their own local ways. All right. So 13th Amendment, how do you get around slavery? Sharecropping. 14th Amendment, how do you get around citizenship? You pass these discriminatory black codes and eventually Jim Crow laws. Okay. 15th Amendment, how do you get around voting? Literacy tests, okay? Literacy tests are tests that you require before somebody's allowed to vote. But these tests were impossible, and they were designed on purpose to take advantage of the fact that most Black Americans at this time are not educated. So like, sorry, you can't read, you can't complete this literacy test, you can't vote, okay? Sometimes one literacy test is given to the white person coming to vote, a different one is given to the Black person who is coming to vote. Okay. This is done on purpose to disenfranchise Black people in the South. Okay. And it becomes rampant. And when that doesn't work, you could always have grandfather clauses built into your voting procedures. So if Alabama, for example, or the state of Louisiana, in this case, for example, if a grandfather clause means if your grandfather couldn't vote, you are not allowed to vote. Well, how many people who are newly freed had grandparents that can vote, right? And poll taxes, which require money to be able to vote, okay? And how many recently freed people have got the money to pay to vote now, okay? They're so destitute, they're returning back to plantations. So these three things, okay, are meant to disenfranchise Black Americans. They're put in there on purpose, right, by Southern white legislatures, okay, especially after Reconstruction ends, okay, and I'll talk about that dynamic here in a little bit. Here's an example of a literacy test from the state of Indiana. I encourage you, if you get a chance, to go back and kind of look at how bogus this test is. Okay, especially for somebody who literally can't read. Like, you guys can do this, you can read, right? Imagine somebody not being able to read, try and take this test. Okay, and to be honest with you, they're also used to disenfranchise poor white Americans as well. Okay? It's amazing to give you the effect of all these voting restrictions. It's amazing to think about. So right when the Civil War ends and Union troops are occupying the South, all of a sudden, Black Americans start getting elected to like positions of mayor, right? They get elected to local judge positions, or there are even Black Americans who are going to serve in Congress. Like, as long as Union troops are in the South, making white Southerners do what they're, being told to do, the Black population can vote. You get some sense of power. There are people in decision-making roles in government locally, even in Congress, okay? As soon as those Union troops leave the South, all of that comes crumbling down. And you're gonna have states in the United States that have a mostly Black population that is now free, but somehow can't seem to get anybody but white people into office, right? Like, how is the state of Mississippi, everybody elected after Reconstruction ends, all white, when Black people are the majority, right? More than a little shady, and it's all got to do with this stuff. Okay, and it shows you white ambivalence to it in the North, because if anybody really cared, they would have stopped these practices. These practices are going to be in place until the Civil Rights era 100 years later, y'all. Okay, do you understand that? The Klan, I mean, there's not a lot to say about them. they're terrible. It's a terrorist organization. It's, you know, white supremacist terrorist organization that rampages through the South. It's another thing for Black Americans to worry about, because they're going to indiscriminately just target people and lynch them. Again, note what I say here is when Union soldiers occupy the South, the Klan has to go underground. They have to hide, right? Because they can get arrested. You know, they can, if you're a Klansman, you can actually be prosecuted. Ulysses S. Grant, again, big fan of Ulysses S. Grant. When he becomes president during Reconstruction, he makes it a point to go after the Klan particularly. Like he wants them hunted down. Right. Here's a guy who fought against the South, right? He was the general of the Union Army, and he wanted to make sure these guys that you rounded it up and you brought them to justice. So as long as Ulysses Grant was in office, right, the Klan had to kind of lay low. But once again, after all of that, after 1877, that's all going to change. When Union troops are pulled out of the South in 1877, something I'm going to tell you about in a minute here, that's when all of this changes. And so these harassment techniques, there's the murder by the Klan, this is sowing fear. Even if you did find a spot where you could get in to vote, if you're a Black person, the Klan would be there waiting for you, right? So this is, I mean, it shows you guys the face of Southern resistance. All right, so this is what I'm telling you, the Compromise of 1877. So Reconstruction takes place, to go back to the whiteboard for a minute. Reconstruction takes place from 1865 to end of the, which is the end of the Civil War, to 1877. Those are the 12 years of Reconstruction. Andrew Johnson is going to serve the early part of that. Ulysses Grant will be elected, and he will cover like the second part of Reconstruction. And when he's in office, right, the troops are in the South, right, forcing Southerners to, like, you know, cooperate, for lack of a better term. However, the 1877 election was very close, as you can see here. And there were some disputed votes coming out of Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, because these were unreconstructed states. And the question was, how should their electoral votes count for this election? Okay. And you can see how close it was from the numbers. The guy that Republicans are running is Rutherford B. Hayes. You can see here, Hayes, okay, running against Tilden, the Democrat. Well, this is so close, this election, that these last electoral votes in Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina were disputed as to where they should go. So the whole deal all fell to Congress to decide, right? And the Republicans decide to make a deal. In exchange for the presidency, military reconstruction will end. The troops that have been occupying Southern states in what were known as military occupation zones are going to be pulled out after, this is 12 years after the Civil War has ended, when Northern troops are going to leave the South, and in exchange, Republicans get the presidency. So what, in effect, is the result of the Compromise of 1877? White Republicans in the North sell out Black people in the South in order to get the presidency. That's effectively what happens. And when Compromise of 1877 ends Reconstruction, now Southerners can do whatever they want down there, because nobody's looking over their shoulders. There's no supervision. There are no troops there enforcing the new laws. And that's when the Jim Crow society gets built, okay, in earnest. And the Klan comes out of hiding. And now the South just becomes a very difficult place to live if you are a Black person, and will be for about 100 years in the South, okay, after the Compromise of 1877. You have to know this. It's important, like turning point, okay? And what are whites attempting to do in the New South? Well, the New South becomes a phrase, okay? A phrase that politicians use. What is the New South going to look like that emerges out of the Civil War? Well, The simple answer is the New South is the same as the Old South, basically, with some mild changes that are put in place to benefit Southern whites. Okay. There are these redeemer politicians, as they are called, okay, who are Southern Democrats who want to preserve this romantic image of the pre-Civil War South, while at the same time moving the South towards modern industrialization, okay, and modern capitalist economy. There will be increased industrialization, particularly in the areas of producing rubber and producing tobacco and things like that. Some steel production in the South. So there will be some industrialization that is going to now start taking place with the help of, you know, these redeemer politicians who are pushing this sort of thing. But as I told you guys before, sharecropping still widely practiced, right? It's most of the time the only option for Black people, and whereas whites can start sinking their money and efforts into industrialization. You know, increased Klan activity, again, is a hallmark of the New South, right? Reminder, Black people are no longer enslaved, but they're going to be treated as such. And anybody that tries to speak out or tries to assert themselves in the Black community is immediately going to be targeted by the Klan or the local police, which are sometimes both, okay? Talked to you already about Jim Crow laws and segregation, which are going to be the hallmark of the New South. Voter suppression and all of the things that I just described to you. And then kind of the last thing I want to discuss here is, or make you aware of, is the Southern myth of the lost cause. Like, again, circle this in blood, because this idea of the lost cause of the Confederacy, right? The South will rise again kind of a thing, right? It's this belief that, like, you know, Southerners would have won the Civil War, except that they were outnumbered and they didn't have the weapons produced by industrialization or the railroad capacity that the North had. And so that Southerners actually fought more valiantly. And, again, it's this romanticized vision of the Civil War that, Northern commanders and leaders like William Tecumseh Sherman were unnecessarily brutal on white Southerners and kind of, they would have never fought that way. It's a bogus vision of what the South was before the Civil War, and the idea of trying to keep this romantic Disney World view going about what the Civil War was about and what the South fought for. All right, the famous lost cause, this heroic stand against Northern aggression. Okay. And so all their histories down there are colored by that. It's all biased, romanticized kind of BS. Okay. The reality of the New South was easy. It can be easily captured in this quote by Henry W. Grady here, editor of the Atlanta Constitution. Okay. Let me read it for you. The supremacy of the new white race of the South must be maintained forever, and the domination of the Negro race resisted at all points and at all hazards, because the white race is the superior one, the superior race. This declaration shall forever run with the blood that feeds Anglo-Saxon hearts, right? So even this statement alone, and Grady was a major editor in the South, the Atlanta Constitution, which is a newspaper. He was an influential voice, and you can see even this statement smacks of like romantic image of what the South now is going to be. And like, we're going to preserve our identity no matter what these Northerners are making us do. Okay. You see this already. It's 1888. And I put this in here to give you guys a sense of, because there's been all the controversy, if you want to call it that, over recent years about taking down monuments in the South that commemorated like Southern generals or Southern politicians of the Confederacy, because they're racist. Like, you're making monuments to racist people, okay? And again, you know, if you're a person of color and you walk past or attend a school that's named after somebody that enslaved your people, like, how do you feel about that? You know, I mean, every single person that I've heard that is against tearing down these monuments is a white person, right? Like, and you look at when these monuments were built, they were built during the Civil War, but as time passes, in the aftermath of the Civil War, look at how these monuments keep getting built and these statues to commemorate these romantic leaders of this glorious cause that Southerners had, because for them it was about Southern rights. Stop talking about slavery all the time. And so they like build these monuments to kind of preserve this image that they want you to believe about themselves, right? You see, we hit a high point here in the early 1900s. And you see another one here during the Civil Rights era when Black people were asserting themselves in terms of like getting the economic and political rights that they deserve and have been long delayed. That's when the number of these statues get built even more as white Southerners try to push back against this. It's very interesting to me to look at this and how most of these monuments that are now in the news all the time about them getting torn down, you know, they were built during this like bogus time period of the New South with their romantic images about, you know, we will rise again. Okay. And this is perhaps a picture that says it all, right? This is in 1907, the Jefferson Davis Monument. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy, right? He's a traitor to this country, traitor. But here you've got monument dedicated to him, people dressed in Civil War outfits out in front of it in 1907. There's your Confederate flag, right? The idea that this kind of racist heritage in the South associated with the Confederacy still lived on long after the Confederacy itself was defeated, okay? So that hopefully that little lecture there for you gives you some sense of what transpired with result of you know, Reconstruction period and what the political and economic effects of that are going forward, right? So you will be writing a journal on this tomorrow, asking you to compare the situation for Black Americans before the Civil War and after, what changed and what did not. Okay, so thank you guys, and I'll see you when I see you.